second last item before the end of the day. The last item will be immediately following this. If you'll transition back around, they'll do evening prayer right around the corner. Just follow the signs. That'll be the official last ending of the day. And then one announcement that Chad Walker wanted to put out, which is the tour of duty group. As soon as we're finished in here, you know we are. Just come down front. Chapel Walker will be down here to meet with you all. I'm just going to tee this up for you all to know why we're doing this, kind of what the context is behind it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chaplain Kopech, who will carry the rest. So to place this low-density, high-demand religious support coverage thing into some perspective, almost 3 weeks ago, we convened at Fort Jackson for the Catholic Religious Support Symposium and Working Group, where we took on kind of this topic of doing less with respect to religious support, in particular with Roman Catholics, but this applies a little larger, and I'm going to frame that context here in a moment. There are several individuals in here in the group. Chaplain Palmer was there, Chaplain Whitlock, Chaplain Green was there. So if you were there, would you go ahead and raise your hands? So there's a group of folks that were there for that, and I would encourage you that if you have some questions about the work that we did there, to feel free during the week to reach out and engage them in more discussion. Secondly, I want to introduce you're going to hear a term today that some of you may not have heard. I'm going to ask the members of the Catholic Advisory Council to stand up. Not present in the room is also Lieutenant Colonel John Barkemeyer. You guys can sit down, thanks. And Jeff Wharton, who represents the married priests dimension of that group. So those are the two folks that aren't here. John is currently popping around Afghanistan, doing some religious support coverage there, and Jeff is trying to finish up his ILE. And it's a good thing, yes sir. And so Chaplain Kopech's going to talk a little about what that group does and how you can utilize us going forward. So, next slide. Why are we here? Well, I'm going to direct you to the upper left-hand quadrant there of the slide, the problem statement. So, currently the Army is manned at 83% in captains. We're manned at 94% in majors. And so this issue of low density, high demand is placed within a larger context of the Army problem of simply not having enough chaplains. And we heard about that also from the recruiting front today. So it forces us to balance the needs between readiness and between placing folks in the generating force. So it comes down to this: are we going to put folks in chapels and maintain robust chapel programs, or are we going to weight our effort in the readiness area? And so this is a draft problem statement. Disclaimer out there: it is not approved. It's not an official problem statement on this yet. We're working this, but it's helping to set the stage for what the chief is going to talk about tomorrow, and then we'll unpack a little bit. So the shortage of captains and majors strains our ability to provide, in general, and particularly, low-density, high-demand religious support. So the way we've generally done low-demand, high-density religious support is we just continue to spread it thinner and thinner and thinner and try to put someone at every installation. That doesn't always work so effectively. And we'll talk about some of the issues that creates with respect to mentoring challenges, etc. Why are we concerned then with this problem larger as an Army problem, and then more narrowly as a problem with the low-density, high-demand faith group? Well, because Roman Catholics represent approximately 23% of the force, and as those of you who have had the chance to work with in senior-level organizations, that number is higher in our Army senior leaders, and so that's why it's in particularly an issue that we're going to talk. We currently have 80 Roman Catholic priests serving on active duty. Of those 80 that are on, that are active and available for assignment, those 80 represent 5.6% of the chaplains in Compo 1. 5.6% of the chaplains in Compo 1. That's what Doug Ball tells me, sir.
Right.
Of these 80, 5 are retiree recalls. Of those 5 that are retiree recalls, for 2 of them for sure that they will be recalled for the last 2 years starting this summer. And then they'll have hit that point at which they are going to retire. So you can see the problem. We have a current priest distribution slate that is based at 78. Are you starting to see the math problem? So we've got a current distro slate that's based at 78, and we've got 80 folks to fill it. And then there's some additional impacts there that successive assignments in garrison. So, and this doesn't matter what your denomination is. If you serve in back-to-back garrison assignments, probably not going to lead to you being promoted, right? If that's your only thing that you do. Like all of us, we need that diversity. The problem is that many of our priests have been adversely impacted because we had put them in IMCOM assignments for so long. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chaplain Kopech, who is going to talk kind of the rest of the piece that we did here with respect to our low-density, high-demand working group that was conducted at USACS, some mitigation strategies, and then some tasks that lie ahead of us. Sir.
Minutes. All right. So, going to a discussion, and he framed the problem quite well. And so again, as Andy said, what I'm trying to do is pretty much present to you where we are right now and what the situation is right now. We keep working the issues, and I know the chief is going to talk some more about it, and also we'll have an opportunity at later time to address some specific questions. So again, it becomes obvious that we need to figure out how we will balance the requirement, the readiness versus generating force. And General Funk in the Third Corps, he uses this term stance and balances, kind of boxer type of approach, and I think it's very proper to use in this particular case because, again, we need to figure out how non-cloud readiness and generating force, how they work together. And because yes, we still have the very basic requirements that we have to meet when it comes to the, especially a Catholic coverage, but we have to have quite a bit of flexibility. So, the next point will be, as Chaplain Meeker mentioned today, there's recruiting, which of course we have to invest into. Definitely that's our future, but that's not going to solve the problem within the next 5 or 6 years. So what Chaplain Meeker talked about obviously applies also to the Catholic chaplains. And the bottom line is that we need to have a unity of effort if we truly want to properly address the issue of low density or a Catholic coverage. So now, Andy was the Mr. Negative. He's the problem. I'll be the Mr. Positive because that's my nature, being Mr. Positive. And I'm not sure what I'm going to say is politically correct, but the famous saying by Kopech brothers, because I do have there's another Chaplain Kopech in the Army, you know, the other Kopech. But the famous saying by brothers, Kopech brothers is, hey, we survived communism, we can survive this. Power of positive thinking. So what is the solution? I would say there's 2 pivotal aspects to the solution of the providing proper religious accommodations for Catholics. Because that's number one, how we should frame that problem. Going to the past, some discussions, preferential treatment and so on, etc., etc. Is it the Catholic Church's problem? Is it a chaplaincy problem? Well, basically it is an Army problem, as we said. And as we talked a few minutes ago, the issue needs to be framed as an issue of religious accommodations. because that's what it is. So, the two pivotal aspects for this, number one, is to create a common understanding of what religious support for requirements are for Catholics. And what we understand of creating a common understanding is among Catholic chaplains, all the chaplains, and commanders. All right, that's the first thing that we need to do. We need to create that common understanding. And we already took some steps towards it. That's what we created this document, which we, working title of that is a Catholic SOP, but the title is still most likely going to be changed. But what that document does is pretty much addresses, creates it's a document which can be first and foremost used as a training tool for chaplains and commanders to understand what the religious accommodations for Catholics are and potential challenges they may see and potential mitigation strategies or particular actions they can take if there's a severe need for a Catholic code. So that's number one. Number two, we did this district plan review, which Andy mentioned, and what we did was we looked at the, again, how many priests we have, and what are the requirements, and what we did was we assigned the criteria, which are listed from 1 to 5, and which criteria got certain weight assigned into it. So the readiness, division, and posts got number 5, and so on and so on. But basically what that allowed us to do is to create priorities. Which garrisons, which locations will get Catholic chaplains and how many of them. But also, as you can imagine, that created a cut-off line. So you create a situation that we'll have to make a tough decisions and potentially in some locations, which is already happening in some locations, transition the Catholic support to the civilian parishes. Number 3, mitigation strategies. And this is where we find the second, as far as I'm concerned, second pivotal point to find a solution, which is the increase of use of Catholic pastoral life coordinators. I argue that this is second pivotal aspect. After having common understanding, really have good understanding of what Catholic pastoral life coordinators can do. Because in an ideal world, what they can do for us, these are the lay people that properly trained, with proper skills, who can actually satisfy some of the tasks which under current circumstances are done by priests or Catholic chaplains. And in an ideal situation, we'll be in a place where pretty much the role of the Catholic chaplain towards garrison will be purely sacramental, meaning celebrating Mass, baptisms, reconciliation, etc., etc. All the other aspects will be fulfilled by Catholic pastoral life coordinator. And that particular position is in depth described in that working document that we call the Catholic SOP. Right? This is in a nutshell. So again, if you forget everything that I said, I would really encourage you to remember 2 things. What I said in the beginning. Creating that common understanding, that we have to have a common understanding of what the requirements are for the Catholic accommodation for Catholics. And number 2, the important role for Catholic pastoral life coordinators. Also, we talked about eliminating the anticipatory masses on Saturday, which is a point of contention. And the bottom line is that we do have a good support from AMS on that aspect. Archdiocese for Military Services, that is the only endorsing agent for Roman Catholic priests in the U.S. forces. And also we talk about reducing the other masses, or what we refer to as a mass of convenience. And specifically, I'm talking about Sunday masses and holidays of obligations. What do we understand by mass of convenience? What dictates how many masses you should have, and this is basically canon law, is two aspects: the size of your congregation and the size of your church. Now, in the ideal world, on the Catholic side of the house, there should be only one mass on Sunday in the church, even on the civilian side, in the church, which is celebrated by the pastor and celebrated by the parochial vicars, with all the congregation participating in. Spiritual family event. So, if we have a church that can sit 900 people, and our congregation is 800 people, we are in that ideal situation. All right? And so, again, anything which goes beyond that falls under what we call mass of convenience, which is not really supported by Catholic doctrine. And also we discussed implementing the short-term gaps and strategies when necessary. And we'll have those outlined in that SOP. What we mean by that is we have a valid Catholic program on post in the chapel. And we find ourselves in a situation where, like for example, Fort Hood, we all are in deployable units, all four of us. Actually, we're very lucky if we have two priests on the ground at the same time. As a matter of fact, 2 Sundays ago, when Father Budecki redeployed, that was the first time that we had all 4 priests in the church at the same time, which was a big celebration. So what we're talking about, we have a valid program, Catholic program, but all the priests are deployed. So how do we bridge those short-term gaps, such as a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months? Again, we discussed that, and that's going to be a part of our Catholic SOP. Now, number 4, the Catholic Advisory Council, and you mentioned that. Basically, this council was established about a year ago, and again, the whole purpose of this council was, again, to create a group of subject matter experts who can actually help and advise the chief of chaplains on the Catholic specific issues. And actually it's a two-way street. Sometimes there are issues which are emerging, and through deputy chief of chaplains, that's related to the council. But also what we do as a council, we keep our ear to the ground, and as we see some issues emerging, we try to become proactive and address that through the proper channels to make the chief aware of it. Right? And again, the challenge, I would say, with the Catholic Advisory Council is that, like everybody else, we have our full-time jobs and so on, but again, it's an honor and pleasure to serve the chief. We're doing good all the time. So final point, basically the final quadrant focuses on tasks, and as you can see, there are very specific tasks that we're working on, and pretty much Catholic Advisory Council is pretty much involved with all of those. And again, we still have quite a bit of work to do on the messaging plan. That's always very tricky. But again, we've been working on it. So having said that, we still have 8 minutes. I'll be more than happy to take any questions right now.
Chaplain with Forscom. On the advisory council, just so I want to make sure I hear you straight. So it's been meeting for roughly a year. The membership, is it, what's the membership of the council? Does it Is it only priest, or is it only Catholic, or do you involve, you know?
Good. So actually, we do have business rules, which number one, which still are pending approval from the chief of chaplains. But to answer your question, initially all the members were appointed by the chief of chaplains, mainly priests. However, now we're expanding, and yes, we'll have a Protestant chaplains also on that council.
Sir, to go to Chaplain's question, the assignments officer, I don't need this. The assignments officer are also part of that.
Use it.
We're recording.
The question was, is assignment officer part of that council? The answer is no, the assignment officer is not a part of that council. Yes, sir.
Hey, a quick question for anyone who's on the advisory council. How do y'all envision the relationship between DREs and the Catholic Life coordinator? And one, are there any uniquenesses or expertise that people bring to your advisory council that take into consideration Oconus uniquenesses, particularly in Europe and other places?
Okay, so the first part of the question, I would argue that there's a very clear distinction between what the Catholic Pastoral Life Coordinator is supposed to do, what DRA is supposed to do. And I understand that sometimes, because of sometimes we had the way the contracts were written and about some other issues, there were overlaps, but there are two completely distinct functions within the Catholic community. That's number one. As for the DREs, etc., being involved, the way we look at it, at least as a council, is depending on what type of issue emerges, then we definitely will reach out to a subject matter experts. If the issue is with the religious education aspect, definitely we'll be seeking advice and input from the DREs. And as for the, okay, I'll know that. Did I answer your question? Okay.
And just any Oconus, did y'all consider any Oconus uniquenesses? And I have specifically in mind, you know, the 50 or so geographical dispersed sites and garrisons in Europe.
So when you look at the our weighting criteria, number 3 is isolated locations, language and geographical. So basically, we're talking about overseas, such as Korea, Germany, but also we are talking about a place like Fort Ewing, California, which that could be considered the isolated place, geographically.
Popular corner back here. Jack Summey, 18th Airborne Corps. Just got back from Iraq, Syria. One of the unique things, Ray, that we deal with, and I don't know if there's a policy out there, is that we have coalition partners who are Catholic. So Father Don Bruno from Italy wanted to leave a bunch of host Baptists that he had blessed because he was leaving and there was going to be a lag time before his replacement came in. Luckily, Eric Alberson was available. I could reach out to him and say, what is the policy? What is it we can and can't do? We also had somebody from Canada who is not a priest, but the Canadian Army endorses as a Catholic layperson. And again, we are lucky to have Chaplain Alberson available so that we can ask for policy. But those are some of the things that we get more and more joint, more and more coalition partners that we definitely, many of us are going to need guidance from.
Yes, so number one, when we talk about the SOP, the main focus is pretty much the garrison environment. You're asking a question about the specific challenges that we face in downrange. And definitely this is something what could be addressed with the Catholic Advisory Council. Again, my answer at the top of the head for that one, since I do have experience with that, is if the support happens on installation or FAB that is run by American forces, we should follow the AMS rules. If it's in coalition forces, then we follow their rules, which not necessarily might be matching. But so that's number one. Number two is again, I would say to try to identify who your senior priest is. And we're very blessed to have Eric Albertson in CENTCOM, so he's pretty much within to answer those questions.
This is Chap Waters.
But I'm sorry, and final point, because also we have to keep in mind some of the aspects that you described. It's not a matter of Army policy, it's a matter of military archdiocese policy, which becomes even more tricky.
Well, I'm Chaplain Waters, the CHOPS, and I was also the CENTCOM chaplain, so the issue that Chaplain Stummy raised appropriately was answered by the COCOM chaplain who set the policy for that theater. So he would have that in a policy, or at least be able to speak to it. So he needs to be, that person, that COCOM chaplain needs to be included in those kinds of discussions.
Hey, sir. It's Dr. Major Martinez down here. So in reference to that, how can you answer that? Because UCOM has a policy on it. It's NATO countries, NATO agreement they have. Those countries are required to take care of their own individuals, their soldiers. So there is a policy out there, there is guidelines out there that deals with that issue, that question that Chaplain Stumpy that you asked her. But you just got to find out who those chaplains are and what countries they are.
I don't have a question, we answered it,
Okay.
Chaplain Albertson. The point is that that is something that's going to be raised more
Right.
and more and more as we deal with coalition partners. And that's one of the things I wanted to do for those on our downtrace units, to make sure they didn't get caught up with, hey, we've got a Catholic priest and he's from other country. And it's like, well, we as Protestants don't think of that. We think, hey, we got a Catholic priest. Well, it must be, but as Chaplain Kobach said, the AMS in the United States policy is different than the endorsing agency in Canada, Italy, everywhere else, which is something that's totally new.
However, the bottom line is that as long as that person is a Roman Catholic priest, then we can receive sacrament. Catholics can receive sacrament. And I think the time is up, 7:20 sharp. So, thank you.
So again, this is an initial conversation. It's going to be followed on tomorrow by the chief, who will talk particularly about the leadership aspect of this. And then you notice on the schedule, there is time set aside each of the afternoons on, I believe it's Wednesday and Thursday, where we will be able to offer some particular questions, some specific questions that you might have with respect to this issue with Catholic low-density high demand. We'll also be able to talk with you a little more specifically about some of the roles of folks on the CATHAD and some additional stuff. So we'll be unpacking this more. Today was just to set you up for what is the Army problem and how does that translate to what the chief will talk about tomorrow, so that when he comes in here, he's not pitching this cold and we're not left with this situation where somebody doesn't understand kind of the basics of how the problem is framed. So with that, thank you. The group, the tour duty group, if you want to meet down here, and then evening prayer around the corner.